Having trained like 340 salespeople on the same team, supposedly the same process, their show up rate varies wildly a lot of the time because there's a lot of things salespeople can do to sort of ruin their show rate or improve their show rate.
What are some of those things?
Well, it's just like them being...
Jack Rocky is a sales genius who spent years mastering the art of building high-performance sales teams.
After helping businesses generate millions in revenue, he's identified the principles that separate average performers from elite sales machines.
And now, Jack is breaking down exactly what it takes to build teams that scale, convert, and win consistently.
What are some of the characteristics of an ultra-high performer in a setting role?
It's diligence and aptitude. They don't have to be talented because it's typically going to be their first role, but it's assessing their trainability.
Once upon a time, I sold a personal training package for 140 grand in a market that's charging $70, $80 in a race to the bottom. How the fuck did I do that? Well, I was diagnosing.
I think conventionally a lot of salespeople are nice, so you don't have to be nice, just have to be good.
What you've seen being some of the most effective ways to take an average performing team or an agent to being a high performing agent.
From a tactical standpoint, as a manager, there needs to be a tight feedback loop. But deeper down from there, a huge part of what you want to be doing is...
He's led and trained over 340 sales professionals, generated more than 30 million USD in revenue, and built sales operations that turn chaos into clarity for 7- and 8-figure founders. But here's the twist. Before he became the precision sales operator, Jack spent 8 years in the UK and Australian military, serving in reconnaissance. No degree, no business background, just discipline, grit, and the obsession with mastery. In less than a year after leaving the military, he rebuilt himself from scratch, learning the one skill that every founder, every closer, and every operator needs: decision and execution. Today, he helps founders bridge the gap between leadership and sales performance, systemizing teams, raising standards, and building cultures that actually win. In this episode of The Freedom Formula, we break down what elite execution actually looks like, how discipline creates freedom, why fulfillment will always outperform flashy marketing, and how to engineer a sales team that actually hits KPIs month after month. You are listening to the Freedom Formula podcast, where we decode the playbooks of high performers like Jack, creating income, impact, and independence on their own terms. I'm your host, Shane DaCosta. Let's dive in. Jack, welcome to the Freedom Formula podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Pleasure to have you on, my friend. And you know, you're well known in the space of sales. You're someone that is always on the lips of anyone that I ever talk about, that, oh, you should talk to Jack. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I just will. Maybe I will talk to Jack. And this is not the first time we've met, of course, but you know, it was clear when we first met that you're someone that has a lot to share. So I thought we would jump into this and hopefully, you know, really leave the listeners, the freedom fighters, those that subscribe to this channel, with something to think about that inspires them. So I suppose to give us a little bit of context about, you know, your journey until this point, because there's some amazing stuff I really want to dive into. The frameworks, the lessons, the things we can take away. You know, if you're a 7- or 8-figure founder, listen to this. There's going to be some gold nuggets in here that you just won't want to miss. But before we get to that, I mean, just intro us to who, I suppose, Jack is and how you got into sales, so we understand then where you are right now.
Sure. So I never finished school past, like, you know, basic degree, like year 10 in Australia. Criminal loss for a bit, got into the military at 19, did 8 years there in the UK and the Oz military. And then once I got out, again, I had no degrees. So I needed to, one, obviously build financial freedom for myself, but two, and more importantly, have something to go after again. Like, there's not a lot of purpose when you get out of the military. So sales was, it was something that was always mentioned to me when I was a kid that I should probably try it. And then it kind of, I sort of reluctant to it my whole life, found it, and then I realized I probably should have started sooner. So it was, yeah, that whole period was like 8 years, 9 years.
And sales is that thing, right? I suppose it's something that we recognize very early on, where we can add a lot of value in it very quickly without having to go down the traditional route of getting a university degree or some useless diploma or something to that effect, where, you know, almost handicaps us in some way, shape, or form down the line. But sales is that thing that you learn because you there's something about it that just draws certain types of individuals. And if you can learn that skill, because it is a skill, it's a transferable skill. I'm a firm believer in that no one's born naturally inclined to sales. It's just something that if you choose to learn, you can learn, because I see it as a science, and I'm sure you do, given that you're so data driven, which is what we're going to be talking about. And so you went through the military, you came out, there's no degree, you're sort of focusing on, okay, well, there's something I've got to do this, and you felt pulled towards sales. So just so I understand maybe a little bit about sort of the philosophy that has indoctrinated you into sales, because we all get influenced by certain people, right? I remember when I first got into sales, I would probably say the first person that influenced me was Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone, not so much the tactical approach to sales, but the mindset of sales, sell or be sold type approach in that, So what were some of the, or who were some of the influences early on for you that indoctrinated you about sales?
It would have been Matt Ryder, no doubt, for sure. Just the way that he approaches sales, it made sense to me from a mindset perspective, just because it's very clinical, logical in the way you think about it. But ultimately, there's sometimes a lack of rules, right? It's not as straight line as some people teach it. I think with Matt, he's like very flexible in the way that he has a conversation with the potential buyer, and that made sense to me. Just understanding what they're actually saying behind the words. There's a difference between the content of what they're saying, the frame of what they're saying, and that made a lot of sense to me. So he definitely was like the first, and continues to this day. I'm fortunate enough that he's like, I'm a lot more close to him now. But yeah, it definitely Matt.
Yeah, and so that was a huge influence, I guess, in shaping the way you look at the exchange, the way you look at a sale. And so who else, I guess, has been an influence? Because we all, I guess, if you're in sales operating at a level that you're at, in an elite status, for example, and training teams, like we all need to sharpen the sword. I mean, even elite marksmen practice every day their shooting and their precision and so forth. So who do you continue to read or study, for example, or learn from to continue to add new layers to your craft?
Yeah, this is something that I'm probably one of the biggest things I'm on is not taking just mentorship from sales. I find there's a lot of value from just like bigger business. So for sure, Peter Thiel, his book 0 to 1 is a book that I always advise people read. And then another one, which is close to sales, is Breakthrough Advertising from Eugene Schwartz, just like one of the OGs. And a lot of that book is like an index of what's going on in the person's head from top to bottom. And I find like that's been so valuable in kind of building some of my own mechanisms for teaching. It's been very valuable for coaching. Is Breakthrough Advertising for coaching sales. Very good.
Yeah. And so let's dive into your superpower, right? Because anyone that gets invited onto the Freedom Formula in some way has a superhero element to them, and they've got I suppose a secret sauce to them, or I suppose an area of brilliance is how I like to describe it. Your area of brilliance is training elite sales teams, right? So tell me about, I guess when we sort of start to think about the decisions and the amount of decisions that need to be made in order to first identify a problem in a sales team, to then be able to diagnose what the potential problem is, to formulate a hypothesis. I would, based on this data, I would suggest that possibly this is the issue, that to then go away and explore it further. So I guess talk to me about some of the ways in which you diagnose whether a team's performing well or not performing well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the type of business, but you have your sort of North Star metrics. Like for a salesperson, you have cash collected per book call. You can look at like lead to booking for a setting team, right? And lead and sort of book and scheduled to close or booking to sell. But these metrics, there's not something you can actually do about them. They're not as tangible as taking an action based upon seeing that number. So what I focus on is looking within that data to the sub-metrics or the minor KPIs, such as your pickup rate, the conversational booking rate for the setting team, and even down to getting data on, for example, the pickup to conversation over 30 seconds, so we can identify they're not bad at the call, the process isn't bad as a whole, it's just they're open and need to work. And by focusing on that in the team training, or even more specifically, if it's just 1 or 2 salespeople on my team, I'm able to just actually go with the root cause of the problem, and the lift far outweighs the effort, right? As opposed to training them on something that doesn't need fixing. So that's like a big part of it.
Yeah. So for those listening, what some of that to give that bit of context, we're talking about aspects of an SDR department that are making outbound dials, and within a few seconds they need to disrupt the pattern of the prospect, the lead, and get them interested enough to keep listening, right? And that opener, when you talk about opener, it's the initial line, getting past the initial resistance. Sales resistance is normal, people experience it. So what Jack is referring to basically is the ability to consider whether or not, as simple as breaking down the opening, is going to shift the metrics in such a way that it's sort of further upstream, so to speak, right? Yeah. So you're looking at, I guess, you're trying to dissect, basically, when you're looking at performance of a sales team, you're looking at data points, you're looking at numbers, and you're looking at it extremely pragmatically, right? You're looking at it with an unemotional, detached, I suppose, energy. It's numbers, it's a science. And would you say, I mean, of course there are niches and there are niches, right? But fundamentally, it would be fairly close across the board, given it's a marketing machine that fundamentally operates in a very similar approach. There's a lead, they're in consideration mode, they're not ready to buy because yet they're still in consideration. It's speed to lead, speed to relationship. So what are some of those metrics? Let's break those down a little bit. Like, well, what are you looking for in, I suppose, high performing, mid performing, and a red flag where you go low performing?
Yeah, I think like it's definitely right. It's like I've always focused on, as I've talked about, reading outside of and studying outside of sales to understand the principles that stand in persuasion, in advertising and marketing, and all pretty similar. There's crossover, and those are the ones that always, if you follow those, you're always going to get results. And that's why, like, fortunate enough to work across 11 industries and been able to get results across all of them, even though I was always new to each one at some point, right? And I think
what were the industries that you?
I've worked with agencies, obviously business opportunity, fitness, and then like fitness coaching, and then supplements. I've worked in ad agencies, like in like with corporate clients. I've worked with medical. I've worked with, and then within like BizOp or business opportunity, trading, e-com, affiliate marketing. And then there's like two more there that like, of course, real estate. I've got like 3 clients in real estate right now, and in different forms of real estate. So buyer's agent, and then rent to rent, stuff like that. So across all industries, it's always been key to work, because end of the day, the way that I coach founders or sales managers is to focus on the principles, and then they're the subject matter expert of what they do. I'll probably never be that good unless I put in that time. So what I do is bring to them an understanding of sales data that they can take into context with what they're good at in their skill, say for like a buyer's agency sales process. And then they're able to get outsized results for their time, considering their time is constrained with the busy people, by looking at sales data. For example, just those 2 simple metrics of the lead as soon as they come into your business to the booking. And then especially typically if you have a 2-call close, if you have a 1-call close, there's metrics there as well. But if you have a typical 2-call close, then you're looking at the lead to booking rate, and then for simplicity, the booking to sale. And of course, like, this is why we have to sit down with the founder. Not all processes are like that. There's potentially like an initial amount of cash collected from there, and then there may be 21 days until a contract is signed. So we always need to break it down, but the principle always stands that the reason we track data is to track performance and then be able to fix it. We're not tracking things for no reason.
Yeah, of course. Every data point has intention, has something that you can learn from that or take away from that. So typically, what are the ranges for lead to booking, right? So for this, I suppose some of this information is more relevant to founders, people running campaigns, acquiring leads through direct response marketing, and they're spending money, they want to return. ROI is their big focus. They want to make sure that they're not pissing money up against a wall and getting the most out of it, and rightly so, because things are expensive and things are tough, right? And it gets harder, it doesn't get easier. And so if you don't know these points, and I would imagine you may be shocked, and I'd be interested to know sort of what your experience has been. I would imagine most founders, if you ask them these numbers off the top of their head, sometimes they're probably scratching their head thinking, actually, I don't even know. Most of them don't know. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, when you first come. I mean, that's why they come to get the help, right?
What are the numbers that you've seen being healthy and unhealthy from a lead to booking ratio? Where do you usually put them?
Look, I mean, as a TLDR general rule, and for most, you're looking at somewhere between 15 to 20 being not very healthy, but it's pretty typical. And then anything below 15% is sort of red flag, real bad. There's some fundamental broken issue in the process. Like no one executes a decent process that poorly, right? The process should lift that at least 15%. So anything under 15 is pretty much a subpar system. Between 15 and 20 is just not being executed. There's probably one heavy constraint like the pickup rate that needs to be fixed. And then anything between 20 to 25 is good, and above 25 is exceptional. Now, I caveat that in like these general rules are just general rules. Every business is unique. Some of my other clients, they have a KPI of 50% conversation to booking rate. So half the people that pick up, the salespeople need to, acquire that booking. Other clients, they look to disqualify quickly in the first 30 seconds. So their overall conversation to booking rate KPI might be like 12%, right? Like post 30 seconds, it's back at like sort of 50%. So we have to get clear on that because it's pragmatic. But at the end of the day, how do you know? Yeah, exactly. And like, how do you know, or where does this 20 come from? Why 20, right? Well, it's based on the unit economics of the business when baseline, which I'll explain, when baseline was created, which is when the founder or the first salesperson actually got into that offer and validated the sales process themselves, and they didn't just sort of throw someone on there without knowing if it sells, right? They validated the offer. When they did that with 100% effort and integrity, following the process, knowing sort of in their heart of hearts they were going through the process properly, what could they achieve, right? And then from there, obviously taking into consideration the founder probably has it somewhat easier than a other salesperson selling to a cold customer. But they were able to establish what those numbers are when they first validated the sales process. And then when they hired people, they can expect that of them. So, but you're typically looking between, so 15 to 20 is poor, 20 to 25 is good, 25 plus is great.
Mm-hmm. And there's another critical number that you mentioned, which was booking to sale, right? So for founders not understanding that, if it's for every person that actually books, how many conversions we actually get into a high ticket offer, right? And so what are you typically seeing there in the same way from a sort of an acceptable to good to great?
Again, it's a general rule, but sub 20% scheduled to close is when you're starting to look at sub 15 is poor, 15 to 20 is not great, but it's like on the way, and there's probably just some small management fixes that can be done. And 20 to 25 is like starting to look really solid, and you'll see things lift. And it's such an important number to teach people and managers to follow, because there's a bit of a theme in this space of focusing on when you just say close rate, they're talking about live call to close rate or show up to close, right? When as like having trained with 350 there, and having trained like 340 salespeople on the same team, supposedly the same process, their show up rate varies wildly a lot of the time, because there's a lot of things salespeople can do to sort of ruin their show rate or improve their show rate. So by the nature of us...
What are some of those things?
Well, it's just like them being late to calls, their calls running over, and saying, for example, oh, I was busy speaking to the other client, but then you can see by listening to the calls that the calls are unnecessarily going over, right? It sounds like a fair reason salespeople will give for their calls running over, and then they'll say like, oh, I rescheduled the person, so I'm all good, but then I'd want to track what the show up is to the rescheduled calls. Salespeople don't mean badly about it, but ultimately there's a truth at the end of the day to what the true data is. And by the nature of us holding our salespeople accountable to schedule to close, right, it incorporates the show up rate and the show up to close. So by us saying like putting incentives in there, like you're going to get better quality leads, higher volume of bookings based on your schedule to close, it will naturally incentivize your salespeople to ensure that they retain the show rate to the KPI they have all set. For example, it's like 70%.
It's an interesting point, right? Because sales professionals, and I hate the word closers, it kind of icks me, right? I just think these days the industry has just trained so many people to be one-dimensional and be very transactional. I think the word closer is extremely transactional. It lacks the integrity and relationship that's necessary in sales. It doesn't take away from the desire to close deals by any means. If you know me and you know what I teach, I mean, they either going to, if I believe I can help them, they're either going to hang up or they're going to sign up. But the reality is, like, a sales professional, focuses and obsesses over their close rate. And it's something fascinating that, even in my teams over particularly, let's say the last 12 months in particular, I've been working very hard to shift the paradigm, to shift the thinking away from obsessing just over the close rate. In other words, as soon as someone picks up the phone, the percentage by which we get a contract signed, right? The other metric that's really important, which you've just highlighted, and again, I want to zero in on that, is the booking to sale. In other words, the efficiency of that agent, not wasting opportunity, not operating in a way that is wasteful. There's no other way really to describe it. It's fucking wasteful. It lacks urgency. It lacks integrity in a sense, because we need to recognize that every person that actually books in is not a lead. They're not a prospect. They're a human, and they've put their hand up saying, hey, I've got a problem that I think you may be able to solve, and I'm interested enough to schedule in a call. Now, there are so many things that can get in the way of that call happening, but one of those things we don't want to be part of that contributing factor is the agent being late, fucking up, being wasteful in their approach, where, like you said, right, you can go in and audit their call, despite they may have a good excuse. When you actually listen, you can identify very quickly, well, actually here you've wasted time. You've effectively allowed the prospect to go off on tangents, and this hasn't been a good use of time. You've not only missed that sale, because most often we'll miss a sale because we're trying to push to get a close to protect our close ratio, but then miss the next appointment,
Correct.
which then further damages our booking to sale ratio, which actually is unhelpful. And that person was ready, they were willing, but then because we were late, they lost interest and they felt offended, right? So you mentioned earlier some things that we can do to improve the booking to show ratio, because that's part of the equation, getting to an acceptable efficiency score being your booking to sale. So what are some of the things agents, are listening to this, for example, if they're in remote sales and they're maybe not, most people, Jack, you probably know this more than anyone, don't get any instruction, any support, any guidance, any SOPs from their founders. They're left alone, they're left high and dry trying to figure out, how do I improve my show rate? And so they default to what we call the external locus of control. The external locus of control is everything outside of my power. Oh, the leads are shit, the economy's fucked, this, that, and the other. But what they don't recognize is the things they can do, because they don't know. So what are some of those things that they could make a part of their own SOP to improve their booking to sort of show ratio, which would improve their booking to close ratio?
Yes, very good question. So it all starts, obviously, outside of like market positioning and stuff like that, the offer does have a huge factor. The sales manager doesn't have control over that, right? So if we're talking to the person who has the least amount of control, they can still do an incredible amount of things. It all starts from this setter, or if you do have a 2-call process, the appointment setter or the outbound SDR's conversation with the potential buyer, right? Because people buy off people. They don't just buy off landing pages or websites, right? So having a great conversation with the potential buyer, on that conversation, the prospect is essentially using the setter as a proxy to understand how professional the company is. So if you might have a fantastic offer, but if the appointment setter is unprofessional, sounds robotic, like a telemarketer, is overly pushing for the booking before discovery has been established, they don't leave a good lasting impression, all these things are going to tank your show rate, right? Now, from there, and because most teams are sort of trying to address that, right? At least the ones that I work with when I come to them. But one of the biggest lacking factors is the setter to closer, or setter to sales professional's handoff, the setter to sales rep, right? Is once the setter makes their booking, they're like, that's all my work done. And the sales rep, I mean, depending on the sales rep, but a lot of sales reps out there, they just want to have hot leads drop in their calendar and show up, and they don't even know them beforehand, right? As soon as they show up, it's the first time they've communicated it. This is one of the largest reasons. So how do we solve for that? The first thing, we're taking it chronologically after the setting call. What does the potential buyer see between that setting call conversation and the sales call, right? That can increase their buying temperature, which will increase the likelihood that they show up to the call. It's by giving them relevant information. What a lot of sales teams do is they'll go, you need to watch this video. You need to do this, reply why to make sure you don't miss your call. Otherwise you can't ever book a call again, which probably isn't true, right? So what you need to do is put important information in their hands. So if I give you an example, say, for example, if you're selling an offer where you go to potentially like wealthy people's property and clean up like dog waste, right? A lot of people will just go, well, I guess I should just show videos of me cleaning up other clients' dog waste. When if you really think laterally about it, what's most important to that potential buyer as a wealthy person with potentially like a mansion, they just want to know that you're not going to send a criminal to their house, when they're not there to clean up the dog waste. So simply sending them a background check between the first and second call is probably going to give them the certainty, because that's the main concern. So this is, again, the central logic behind what relevant information you'll send to the prospect is based upon what you know that the prospect's concern is on an eventual sales call.
Yeah.
Retroactively, you're like, okay, these people always ask after my presentation, how do I know that the person coming to my property is going to be like trustworthy? Well, I would be getting, as a sales manager, listening to my sales reps' calls, listening to that, and passing that information on to the founder so that they can generate those assets on like a landing page or a thank you page, addressing the concerns, which is going to be a big reason why the prospect goes, I just don't know if it's worth showing up because I don't know, it's not trustworthy. So having that there puts their concerns at rest, and is going to first increase the show rate. So that's just one of the things, right? Mm-hmm. From there, a big part, which is one, for example, with one of my other clients who just came on last week, we lifted his show from 40 to 62 in about a week. And it's simply because there was no group chat. This is just what works for them in their niche. They put the potential buyer into a group chat of some kind, whether it's WhatsApp business, Instagram, etc. Right? Putting them in a group chat with the setter, the sales rep, and then the founder, right? And at scale, it can become obviously a little difficult to keep the founder in all these group chats. So you can remove the founder, but just having the setter and the sales rep come to a group chat together, and the setter brings the potential buyer to the sales rep in this group chat. And then obviously is able to check in with them, ask them if there's anything they can do between now and then to make the call more beneficial, send them those relevant assets, and then send them, as I said, there's sort of the general things we need to help the prospect become aware of, like I used in that example. But what we also want to do is going to make a huge lift is sending targeted proof. So not just going, check out these 25 testimonials. It's working out and actually paying attention to the prospect on the setting call, working out what type of person they are and what is the most relevant testimonial that you can send to them, and put intention in the message, not forced consumption, going, you need to watch this, saying, hey, this person reminded me of you. At like 25 minutes, they mentioned this, and like, remind me of how you said X, Y, Z, right? You should check it out. Just by putting a bit of intention.
It's a considered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a considered exchange.
Exactly. Because there's nothing, like in sales, there's nothing you can do to make someone feel a certain way. You have to feel that in yourself, and then the person will reflect it. So by you having the intent and focus and care in the testimonial and being sort of at least somewhat keen about the fact that it's relevant to them is going to inspire them, right? Because they're watching what you do, not just what you say. Mm-hmm. So it's important to do those things. Those things alone, mm-hmm. You know, other than that, the sort of more granular things that some people over focus on is like the pre-call reminders and stuff like that. But honestly, a lot of that is noise. In 2025, people see a message saying reply Y, they're like, yeah, cool. And then just go back to their life. It needs to be a pattern interrupt of value and relevant value, right? Because I could say, you know, for that example, to tie this off with that property where the people come over your house and they clean the waste, I could say, like, you know, make sure you wear shoes when you come back to see the property. Like, it's probably not, yes, it's true, but is it relevant? No. So you need to be sending them relevant and valuable information before the call and having a human-to-human connection. That's really the principles behind why we use those devices, like sending targeted proof, relevant information, and having a group chat. That's what's going to lift the show, is the human-to-human contact and high-value information.
Yeah, there's so much in that. I think, you know, some of the things that have stood out for me, I guess, in recent times, being in business, having different offers and whatnot, is that the concept of speed to lead, speed to relationship really pivoting in 2025. I remember back in, let's say 2021, 22, whatever it was, you could afford to be a little lackluster in your approach to service, because fundamentally what you're suggesting is service. You start serving before they're actually a customer. Right. You're talking about, you know, relevant, valuable information, targeted proof, you know, increasing the certainty gap, like changing the way they're feeling about, you know, the next step, because now they're feeling certain in, okay, well, this is worth me exploring. The radio station playing in their head, what's in it for me, WIIFM, is critical, because that's fundamentally all that the consumer cares about. Yeah. Something I've been learning a lot more about recently, just from a biological standpoint, is a consumer. You can't deny the way humans interact with things. And that is, you know, as soon as they experience something, we have to bypass the part of the crocodile brain, which is the limbic part of the brain. And what that is, it's kind of friend or foe mechanics, and it usually takes a few seconds where we're trying to establish whether or not we're in danger. Now, that danger could be a physical threat, or it could be a social threat, right? It could be any type of threat where we feel like, A, this is risky, I'm not sure, I don't understand it. A, if we don't understand it. B, if it feels unsafe, then we sort of back out, right? And we don't show up, and that's where we ghost. But so getting past that and getting to a point where we can actually disarm the sales resistance, get them into consideration with that neocortex where they can actually absorb the information. And that's where you're starting to talk about value exchange, showing them that you're here to serve, showing them that you're a real person. In an AI generation, getting beyond the robotic and getting to the human, to the heartbeat. You're talking about connecting me into a micro group to connect humans, to be able to, something important in that as well, it's establishing what is called the status alignment. Status alignment is where the prospect is trying to determine whether or not, like, this person is who they say they are and has the expertise, so the human element, and then the status alignment, like, okay, is there something in this for me? I love that group element, targeted proof to reduce that fear, anxiety, unknown, and that crocodile brain from triggering fight-flight response, and relevant information just serving from the beginning, the speed to relationship. You talked about, I love this bit, the setter as a proxy. We often devalue, and I don't know about you, but we often devalue, in a sense, the role of a setter, right? Like, a setter is seen as the beginning of a sales career, and in some ways devalued, but the way you've described it again just solidifies for me once again the importance of a quality setter, and why you cannot afford to put someone in that seat that doesn't represent your business to the highest standard, because that's the first impression. And unfortunately, a lasting impression is the first impression. Like, it's so hard to combat the first impression. It's virtually impossible.
Yeah.
So what are some of the characteristics of an ultra high performer in a setting role?
It's diligence is a huge part of it, and aptitude. They don't have to be talented because it's typically going to be their first role, but it's assessing their trainability is one of the largest things, right? So when I'm interviewing a potential appointment setter, I'm assessing for that trainability, not by asking questions on the nose, like, are you trainable? But potentially sending them pre-call educational material and then just seeing their ability to learn that effectively by the time we start. There just shows their diligence as well, right? Because those are two important things. Most of the time, the appointment setting conversation is not highly, like, a high level of skill, right? There is a process that needs to be done consistently. Potentially, it could be either hundreds of dials a day, depending on your lead source, and only a few conversations where you need to make it work. Or there's just a high volume of conversations all day that are very similar. So they need to be diligent in following the process, but ultimately being able to navigate concerns and understand that it's like we put our most inexperienced salespeople into a conversation with the prospect when they're at their least aware.
It's interesting.
Right?
It's interesting.
They're least convinced.
Good point. Because it's the point in the conversation where the prospect is actually in consideration and they're on the edge, right? They're neither here nor there. There's no major buy-in at this point, depending, I guess, on the offer or the mechanics of the funnel, whether it's a paid funnel or whether it's a free opt-in. Most people are doing free opt-ins, quizzes and webinars and whatever. So yeah, you're right. It's interesting. Yeah. We're putting a prospect in the lap of a professional, but that's got the least experience and context. And so it's super important that we're methodical with our approach, that we have strong QC. I've seen some of your posts recently about QC, quality control, right? Meaning we need to be listening to those calls, auditing those calls, providing feedback for fast feedback loops so we can bridge the gap between understanding and application very quickly, right? And so... yeah, I would say looking back at the last 12 months, just in particular my health offer, because I have another offer and I'm launching another one very soon. But in the health offer in particular, I guess one of the turning points for us, I'll call it a hook point, was where we introduced a strong SDR department, really strong, loads of outbound initiatives, in like detailed training, strong QC, and respecting the marketing spend and every single person that's opted in as a human, not as a lead. So speed to lead, speed to relationship, respecting that dynamic and working at the edges on the 1%ers constantly. Where can this conversation be skimmed to get to the point to I suppose bridge the gap right now in terms of certainty of this person, whether or not it makes sense to get to the next step. So
Yes.
you train the setter, and then there's got this. What I love was you mentioned about this handoff process, groups that connect and humanize. It's the humanization of the sales professional, because look, people aren't fucking morons, right? They know that they're going to be sold to.
Right.
The best way to sell is from a position of authority and a consultative approach where you're legitimately concerned about their struggles, their frustration, their pain, and a detachment, willing to walk away if I feel I can actually not add value to your situation. So the humanizing of that prospect seems to be something that you really focus on. Oh, sorry, the humanizing of the agent seems to be something you really focus on.
Yes, it's a huge part. It's like I think conventionally a lot of salespeople are nice in a way that the prospect can see through, and it doesn't benefit them, and then they're mean where they should probably be nice, right? So you don't have to be nice, just have to be good. So when I connect with a potential buyer, whether it's my own offer or client's offers, I teach the salesperson, if you want the benefit of what you think being nice will be, give them value. Right? Send a custom voice note when that group chat opens up from both people, or send a selfie video, right? And you don't have to be smiling and laughing around, but you have to show them that you actually care, right? And that little bit of effort is going to, at the end of the day, show you're willing to do that if it's going to double your close rate, right? So that's where we'd be, instead of leaving them in this sort of gap, sort of, okay, great, he's on the cooker. He's ready to be a sales call now. I can leave that. It's actually nursing it. Because they're potentially just left, like just waiting until that point. So we want to make sure that if we want to give them value, that's going to be the best way to make them remember the call, right? Because if people remember purely based on the value, not based on whether or not you were super nice or you were just being like very forceful with forced consumption, then you have to show up to the call. Otherwise you're going to prison or something.
Unfortunately, people that are not trained well enough, they misinterpret the niceness with, I suppose, what the primary objective is on that call. The primary objective and why people are showing up is to solve a problem. They have something in their life, business, whatever it is, that needs a solution, and they're looking at you, hopefully, as the possible next step. In other words, you may have the key to unlock something I yet don't know or understand that's going to change my situation. And sales agents, from my experience, that don't understand their role to the fine detail, misinterpret their role, and what they do is they show up with the desire to be like Jeff Blunt in one of his books. I believe he talks about it in 2 books actually. He talks about it in Sales EQ and Objections. Disruptive emotions. One of those is the validation that needs to be liked, and this disruptive emotion, what it does is it actually changes our persona, and the issue with that is that when we operate in different personas, it actually triggers the crocodile brain. It triggers that, hang on a second, this person was like nice and whatever at the start, and now they're being mean, like you said, right, at a different part of the call. So it's not incongruence. Like there's no congruency in our approach, and we're actually operating in what we call different buyer archetypes. Like we're operating in a different persona. And so operating in that way diminishes our status. It alarms the crocodile brain. In other words, this doesn't feel right. Earlier on, like you asked me about my day, my fucking favorite color, whatever it is, something stupid. And now you're putting pressure on me because I'm telling you I need to go away, think about it. So there's an incongruency there, right? So you're right. So it's, from what I'm hearing from you, you're helping people establish a way of operating that is value driven. It's service focused. It's congruent all the way through. It doesn't change like a fucking chameleon. I hate that advice. If you ever hear a say, by the way, if you're listening to this and you ever hear a sales trainer tell you to modify your personality, like, and man, fucking run for the hills. Like you got to have your own plumb line. In other words, set of values, how you operate, how you engage people, speak to people in a congruent manner that elevates your status and positions you as a subject matter expert, full stop.
That's right. All that matters.
That alleviates tension with people.
Correct. All that really matters to the prospect is that there is an establishment of a what's generally considered a skill delta, right? Or just an agreement that you are potentially more qualified to solve the potential buyer's problem than they are, and you have a service first mindset. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they just need to know, can you help me? Is this worth my time? And if you do that, you don't have to be overly nice through the whole conversation from top to bottom, but you care. Whether it's like whether you in fact, like whether it's you care so much about XYZ prospect is not what is necessarily needed. It's that you care so much about solving that problem, right? You are passionate about solving, like I am, about sales data problems, or you are solving it with weight loss. If you are super passionate, because the potential buyer probably doesn't believe, depending on how much they're familiar with you, that you cared that much about John Smith. But if you are truly just like your head is down and focused towards solving weight loss problems, and they can feel that, they're going to be like, I want to get in the middle of that, right? And by you being that way, it's going to allow you to objection handle in a manner that you probably want to. You can be a little bit more direct while still ultimately being focused on solving the problem. And we haven't mentioned one bit about getting my commission at all, right? The sale, achieving a sale, getting commission is not something you can do. It's something that happens as a result of something that's tangible.
It's a byproduct.
Exactly. It's a byproduct of...
It's a byproduct.
Exactly. It's a byproduct of having, in my opinion, a service-first mindset and being just very laser-like focused about solving your specific problem. And people just want to get in the way. That's what I've seen. Ultimately, when I started my business, like people didn't, a few people around me are going to awesome, mate. But people don't really care about that. They care about how well you can solve the problem. And if you don't communicate that to them in the entire process, then you're going to lower your all of your data. So something you need to do.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick pause now. If you're watching or listening right now, it tells me something about you. Like you want more out of life, more time and more freedom, and possibly even more control over where you live and how you actually earn. But most people never actually take the leap. That's the crazy thing. They stay stuck in routines that drain them, clocking in, clocking out, trading hours for what I would describe as pure survival. Now, you weren't built for that. You were built for so much more, for what I would describe as freedom. The kind of freedom that lets you work from anywhere, live on your terms, and actually enjoy what you do. And that's exactly why I built the Freedom Academy. It's a system that teaches you the one high income skill that gives you all three. Remote high ticket sales is exactly that skill. It's the ability to earn 10 to 30K a month in commissions working from anywhere in the globe, using nothing but your laptop or your voice. So if you're done with living on someone else's schedule and you're sick and tired of the 9 to 5, go to the link in the show notes and apply today, because freedom isn't found, it's actually built. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, and I've always been a firm believer in that money follows value. And you don't need to force that. You just need to provide value. You just need to show up as that. You use the term, which was delta. What was the term you used? Delta.
Skill delta. The agreements of there's a gap between you
Skill delta.
and skill delta between you and the other potential buyer in terms of aptitude to solve their problem.
Correct. And so, I guess the way I sort of train A, my team, and B, now is I'm not sure if you're aware, I'm building the Freedom Academy. I'm training sales professionals, right? We talk about two things. We talk about the fact that, there's a moment in the call, and it happens usually very early on, where there's a need to create what we call status alignment, right? So status alignment is if you're dealing with an intelligent person, so let's say you're in a biz op, they're clearly not a moron. They're clearly aspirational. If they're a founder, if they're building a business, then they've been involved in personal development. They've been involved in marketing initiatives, sales. They already know the game. Sometimes they don't understand all the complexities of the challenge that it's in front of them. And so what they're looking for is to engage with someone that can somehow diagnose their problem, save them time, shrink time, amplify their payoff in as quick amount of time as possible to improve their life. So very early on in the call, what they're trying to establish is that kind of what you mentioned there about that delta skill equation. Well, we talk about status alignment, where what they want to know is that you're on at least an equal par, if not greater, in terms of your status, and whether or not you can achieve what we call local star power. So local star power is, it might be the case, Jack, that, you are great at sales, for example, but if you were to step onto a golf course and you want to improve your drive, you would have to engage with a sales pro, right? For example, and when you step onto that course, local star power is in the hands in that moment with the golf pro, because you're on his turf. And so he would correct your foot stance, your hand position, how you're holding the grip. Very quickly, he would dive in to a mini status tip-off or some kind of a flash roll where he would diagnose very quickly why your posture is inefficient, how your swing is causing issues, and why you actually have to pull back a little bit in order to go further. And by giving you that little bit of information, elevates your status, immediately they start hearing. So it's this doctor frame that people need to perceive, because you're diagnosing, you're not selling. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but once upon a time, I sold a personal training package for 140 grand. Now, adjusted for inflation today, that would be $170,000, a personal training package. Now you would question, well, how the fuck did I do that, right? Like in a market that's charging $60, $70, $80 in a race to the bottom, trading time for money, highly commoditized. Like, how the fuck did I do that? Well, I was diagnosing. I was positioning myself as a subject matter expert, and I was selling an outcome, not like a service, so to speak, right? So it was the doctor frame that I had to embody to be able to get them to be able to purchase something at that level. So so let's sort of go down the line a little bit, right? And we sort of explored some of the data points. I want to pick your brain. I want to know a little bit more about, I guess, then what you've seen being some of the most effective ways to take an average performing like agent, a team or an agent, to being a high performing agent. So you mentioned you have to start, like there's good ways and there's better ways to, from your perspective and your experience, to help sales professionals improve at their work. So what are some of the things that you do to achieve that?
From a tactical standpoint, right, there needs to be this is the biggest part, so we'll fill it as we will drill down into this. But from a tactical standpoint, as a manager, there needs to be a tight feedback loop, right? This is a big part of it, where, for practical example, you would listen to, depending on their constraint, if, for example, their average order value or their average cash or average revenue collected per sale is considerably low, then it'll be listening to those parts of the call where they're potentially flopping over and just taking a payment plan when the potential buyer had the funds. Listening to those calls, right, en masse, not just one red herring, listening to it en masse, and then providing the call review in some form of asset like a Loom, sending it to the salesperson, asking for their feedback, and then in that week, having a call with them to retrain that skill deficiency, right? So that's the more sort of like how it looks in your calendar. But tactically, even deeper down from there, when you are filming that call review or you're doing that training, a huge part of what you want to be doing is, one, teaching principles, not just tactics or word tracks, because
Not just tactics, but doing a big difference.
yeah, exactly. If a salesperson doesn't understand why they're saying it, they don't understand what objective it achieves to benefit the conversation, you'll see it in their tonality. They won't ask it properly. So if you say, well, look, the objective of asking this question is to help the prospect see, for example, the skill gap, right, to get to where they want to go, it's by the nature of you getting them to tell you what they lack, it's going to raise their awareness more, because they're not asking themselves these questions every day. So by you knowing why you're asking it, when you get an answer that maybe isn't, going to help the potential buyer, like they're giving a surface level answer, it's not nefarious. They're not doing it because they don't like you. They just don't know, right? But by you teaching the salesperson the objective of the question, when the potential buyer gives a subpar answer, it's going to be very easy for you to now teach your salespeople when to probe and clarify. Whereas if you just say, oh, you didn't probe and clarify, they don't like, there's an expert bias for a lot of great salespeople and managers. They don't realize that you need to be able to teach the salesperson what you inherently know, and that is the objective of the question, right? So that they'll naturally know how to probe and clarify. So that's just an example. And then outside of that, a huge one is asking Socratic questions to the salesperson. Instead of just telling them, you did this wrong, do it this way.
Yeah. See,
What I would say is follow this general line of questioning.
I love that. I just actually finished. I love that. I just finished rereading Socratic selling.
Yeah.
And so for the listeners who are trying to understand sort of what Jack just referred to, Jack is asking to ask a question basically that allows the actual agent to internalize and to have a moment to think about the answer rather than just giving them the answer. You want to challenge. And it's interesting because recently I started doing that even in my own internal sales training with the Freedom Academy now, whereas there'll be moments where, for example, we've taught principles, we teach principles, we teach frameworks. Within those frameworks are principles, frameworks, and then you've got the tactical stuff in terms of a hierarchy of learning. And often, despite how often you reaffirm the principles, the frameworks, they're still going to revert back to asking, what should I do here? And from my perspective, sometimes the worst thing you can do is give them the answer because you haven't helped them, reflect. You haven't given them an opportunity to build the mental muscle and that neuroplasticity to problem solve. Because fundamentally, as sales agents, we're change agents, right? We help people change, but we solve problems. We help people dissect the problem, identify problems. So if you can't help an agent, well, actually, you don't help an agent by giving them the answer all the time. And in many cases, we love to do it as professionals because it reaffirms to us, it makes us feel good. We know the answers. We're great sales coaches and whatever, but it actually doesn't help them. It doesn't help them because we're just gifting them the answer and we're not allowing them to feel the discomfort of searching for the answer, which then creates the epiphany bridge. The epiphany bridge is when they can connect that question to then, oh, well, this is where I need to arrive, which goes back to what you said, Jack, which is the objective, the epiphany bridge. Oh, now I get why I'm asking. I never understood it. Like today, for example, I was teaching about the accusation audit. Right, we were going through a sales training. We had a few sales agents on, and I was talking about a scenario where the prospect would respond feeling upset, angry, agitated by pressure. And I talked about the concept of an accusation order. How do you use this? And blah, 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 blah. And despite that we teach the I suppose, philosophy, we establish the framework to deal with it, and then we give the tactical components. This agent just didn't get it. Then when I explained it and gave the philosophy again, gave a practical example of the framework, and then asked her to explain it, she said, it's the first time it's actually made sense. Isn't that interesting? I thought, fuck. Yeah. So it finally sunk in because I then had to challenge her, explain it now to me. How would you teach this? So it's that I guess I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's bringing people to that epiphany. So you go into deep learning. It's the tight feedback. So quick feedback loops, which could be what, weekly cadences. What are you looking at?
Yeah, it really depends on their performance. For example, if they're like we established before, that scheduled or book to close, book to sale KPI of 20% or higher being great, and then sort of 20% or lower being sort of moving towards poor. Depending on where they sit there in those sort of like 5% brackets will tell us how many training sessions we're going to do. So for example, someone that's well below that scheduled to close or that book to close KPI of 20%, if they're at 14, especially if they're newly hired and sort of finding their feet and ramping, they might get 3 sessions a week, 4 sessions a week. Whereas a person that's crushing it 25% or over, they might get 1 session a fortnight, depending on how large your sales team is and how big your management team is in relation to that. So it really depends on the amount of performance, but as a general rule, with one individual salesperson that's sitting somewhere around the middle, just as a general rule, you're probably going to do at least one-to-one a week, and once sort of either at least 1 core review, if not like 3 in that week, and just making sure that the training points are all kind of actionable and not giving 50 work on points, kind of bringing them back. That's why you as a sales manager have to be good at sales, in my opinion, because you don't have to be fantastic, but you need to be able to understand how to teach it, right? And sort of make everything digestible. There's 3 action items that you might come out of that core review. My core reviews might have 10 points. Well, I understand the salesperson might get overwhelmed. So I want to bring that home to maybe 3 actionable points, which is like, you keep giving coaching statements where you're like making these statements at the end of the prospect's question, and what they say is what's important. So what you need to do is, if you feel like you want to make this impression upon them in this coaching statement, what questions can you ask that inspire them to start seeing that, right? Because it needs to come from them. So that might be 1 action item. Just having 3 action items. Exactly. But this whole process of doing Socratic questioning, it builds a problem solver in the salesperson themselves. And what it allows you as a manager is really get your freedom back, because all your salespeople are solving problems somewhat on their own, and then in conjunction with you giving them that last sort of 20%,
Yeah.
30% where they go, I was sort of thinking about this problem. I kind of like, I think I did this, that, and the other. And you go, why is that? Well, what do you mean here? Wouldn't this? And they're like, oh yeah, I should have just done this before. I'm like, right, what are you going to do next? And they're like, going to do this. And then they do it. And they're way prouder when they solve it on their own. They're way prouder. They're way happier when you do solve it on their own.
Yeah, you've also built that level of confidence and self-esteem where they recognize, well, wow, actually Jack just validated what I said. That was a good idea. I know how to solve this. And therefore next time I'm not going to, by default, just go straight to asking how to solve it. I'm actually going to take a moment to pause and think about how I would deal with this. So, leadership would be, I guess, would be the next, I suppose, thing to focus on, because when we want to scale, as founders that are listening to this, they're probably freaking out going, holy shit, I don't have time, right? I don't have time to be doing fast feedback loops, multiple training sessions per week, looking at data points. I've got so many other fires to put out, things to do, things to build. I've got a life to live, and yet, my sales team's so critical in my business, but I just don't have the time, the energy, maybe even the skill, right? Because it's not for everyone. Despite that some founders know some fundamentals, it can sell from the hip. Let's call it that. Selling from the hip, kind of like a cowboy, right? But being able to transfer a system to not just one person, but a team requires extreme expertise be able to create a system that's transferable. But at some point we need leadership. Like, I guess, and sales is kind of that industry, right? Like, it attracts a particular type of individual, not always, but kind of, where you can get a lot of cowboys, cowgirls, and it can be difficult to manage and bring everyone into alignment. That's probably how I like to describe it. Everyone into alignment, all pushing in the same direction, fighting for a common cause, moving at the same beat of the drum, like a highly tuned machine, like a team, right? You think about the All Blacks, how they show up in unison and they beat their chests and they do, like, that's a unit, unified for a vision, for a cause, wearing a jersey. That's what it's kind of going to the conversation of culture. And, I just had an interview before you jumped on, and it actually was for a sales role. And I have a very specific process I've kind of developed over time for my interviews. After I get the initial fact finding, I establish this is a good cultural fit. If it's not a good cultural fit, I'll probably end the Zoom pretty quickly. But they won't even get there if they're not, because I pre-vet them with videos and stuff and referrals and whatever. But let's imagine they get on. The very first way that I start to establish the culture so that there's strong leadership from the beginning, like it happens now, is I tell them who we are not. And I'm looking for their reaction in that first display of who we are. And I give a very particular statement where I say, my team is not for everybody. And I create some tension and I explain the standards, not the goals, not the objectives, but the standards that are non-negotiable. And I've probably refined it even more so, particularly after, I had, it escapes my mind now. Other guys in the podcast, we talk about leadership and performance and sales. And over time, you sort of tweak your approach a little bit, you refine your mechanics. But leadership is a big one, right? So you deal with teams, you deal with highly trained people as well, not just new beginners. So you're having to align people that feel like they know it all, but their data points are shit.
Yep.
And so then you need to come in a particular way to deliver a shit sandwich. Yep. So I'm curious to learn about, I guess, how you approach leadership, how you... we've talked a lot about the beginners, but now we want to talk about sort of medium to high level people and how you unify them and that kind of stuff.
So communicating with A players, I guess, is what we're talking about. I mean, I have some clients right now where their top closers making, their top sales reps making 85,000 a month up to that point. And again, it's just like, if it's the same principles for...
What kind of offer is that?
Real estate. And there's another one in job, I would guess you would call job opportunity, where they're bringing a gap, not into a business offer like Bizarre, but more into a job opportunity, getting into a certain industry and getting qualified. So selling the education to get a guaranteed job placement. Those are two big offers that are the sales reps. Again, there's in one case, I'm coaching the founder there on the real estate side, and for the job opportunity, I'm coaching privately the top sales rep, where the next salesperson down from him is making somewhere like 40,000 a month. Right, so there's a big gap. It's not like everyone's making 60, 70, 80, right?
on the same offer where your private client is earning, for example, around about 80K commissions, and then the second closest is earning 40, between those two agents, are they using the same script?
Yes. Basically, yes.
They're using the same,
Right, they are.
same script.
It's just same script. It's just because that offer as well, they basically do need to use sort of the same script. There's a lot of system explaining and stuff like that throughout the conversation. And it's just the execution in the first 10 minutes of the call that we've been so heavily focusing on. And I think a big part of it as well is my client at least says, he's like, because he's renewed probably like 3 times now. He just keeps saying now, like, it's not even the sales training at this point. It's just the intent that I have towards trying to get him the result. Yeah, and like I care about his, like, me getting the case study, him getting the result, and ultimately, like, I just think because I care more than him in some ways for his own goals, because by proxy it's my goal, right? To benefit my business, to benefit just like the good feeling of like purpose about the whole thing. That's what's been driving him to keep trying harder and harder, as opposed to getting that conversation with sort of the 60K a month sales rep going, well, I'm doing good enough, I'm all good. Like, if you genuinely care about them as a founder doing better because you just want to see something exceptional, you want to make a bigger impact, this person can help more people, that's going to help them drive to have a reason to do it, as opposed to just like, oh man, like, you could be printing me way more money, you know? So if you have a real reason behind it, they'll have a real reason behind it. So there's the skill side, but a big part of the leadership is having the intent for them to succeed and truly wanting it beyond just the money. And this will inspire A players, because A players are used to making money. They need something more. They need a purpose. So you need to give them something more. So what I always do with the A players on sales teams for clients is inspire them to sort of set the standard, right? So like I'll always say to them, like, these new people, they're looking at you for everything. It's the same in the military. This is what I learned. It's just like when you're a senior soldier, the new guy rocks up on day one, and he just looks straight to the guy everyone respects and is like, that's all the stuff I need to do and can get away with. So the A players are critical, not to just set and forget and just go, oh, he's a rock star, like, don't bother him type thing. Just don't argue with him. I don't let any salespeople, and especially A players, sort of hold me at gunpoint of going like, well, I just have to be nice to them. I better not piss them off. I'm always focusing on helping to continue to develop them. If it's beyond money, then awesome. Giving them purpose within the business, and then setting them, like, through me being the way I am, them behaving the same way, and then they're going to inspire the new salespeople to do the same thing. So it really does, in some senses, all start with your A player, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. The standards are fish rots from the head, right? And so you're saying basically strong leadership is identifying talent, acknowledging excellence, and getting them on board with the idea. You're selling the idea that, hey, I'm here for you to help you work on the edges. In other words, figure out what you don't know. And sort of, I guess you're getting buy-in from them. By getting buy-in from them, it's easy that everyone else falls in the line, because they're like, okay, this is the standard. The standard is we do all these things. This is how that guy operates, or this girl operates. And so if that's the standard, well, then it would be pretty evident that I won't get away with anything less. And in fact, this is exactly how I got to operate. And I think, you know, something I learned, in particular when I started, or when I joined Russell's community some time back, and just, you know, listening to conversations and being, and sort of just being around elite people. I remember this statement, which was, the best way to tell people who you are is to tell them who you're not. And that sets the standard, right? Immediately. Like, the best way to tell people who you are is to tell them who you are not. And because we're so finely tuned to a negative bias, like, we're so finely tuned, because if you say this is who we're not, then they're paying attention to, like, whoa, fuck, that's different. So yeah, so it's interesting how you approach then leadership. You start top down, in a sense, where it's like, you know, making sure that there's a blueprint. You're effectively creating a blueprint to say that this is the way, and you're working closely. I imagine you would get that person on side. I imagine that, you know, you wouldn't let them get away with murder, and you're getting them on side though, and it's working with them for their own reasons. You're tapping into their deep drivers. I would imagine you'd be incredible at it. I've got no doubt. You know, you're finding their internal driver.
Yes, a big part of it,
which is altruism, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like a big part of an A player's ego or identity is that they are the sort of, I guess, like the best.
They're the alpha.
Yeah, they're the alpha. So
they're
the alpha you can do to harness that for you as a manager or a founder is work with them you always have more context than even an A player if you're a manager or a founder, because you understand the back end and the marketing, advertising, and the front end. So you have a bit more context to them at all times. So there's always a bit of a delta there, but you want to treat them like the subject matter expertise of sales in a sense where they, at the end of the day, they don't get to make decisions that you don't want within the sales process, but it's probably going to be the right one. That's why they're performing, right? So you got to drop your egos in and understand what they know and you don't. And some of the clients that I have that are doing over $1 million a month, for example, they treat their sales rep, their top rep in that way. And what I always do is use the fact that their sales process, their execution of their sales process, their talent, the way they conduct themselves, their call recordings, all that stuff is so valuable to build the process as a whole, or refine and optimize the process as a whole. So that, and I say to them, how can we, yeah, I'm like, how can we, because that's a big part of their identity. It's going to like wake them up to not just go through the motions and go, how can we sort of turn what you're doing into a protocol, or at least the valuable parts of it into a protocol that the new salesperson who has no context, no experience can actually like benefit from. And they're going to get huge ego off that, seeing a new salesperson come into the business and start operating in a way that they sort of established. And so this is an example of leadership. It's like getting people to do something they want to do that just so happens to be ultimately what you always wanted it for, right? It's just an example of that. It's getting the salesperson to have an identity of being mover. Yeah, that's like a huge part. It's not saying you need to do this, you need to do that, because sure, you can spit, you got about 3 bullets there. You can do that a few times. And then they're just kind of waiting for the next opportunity, right? Because an A player is typically out of a job for about 20 minutes and someone else is going to give them a job. So what you've got to realize is they can make money on any of these great businesses, but many of these great businesses, their sort of edge is that they have a superior culture and like feeling, where I've had so many salespeople say, I could be making $20,000 more a month, but I don't want to leave purely because of the development I get from you. And this is why I've been able to retain these salespeople when they could have made 30 and I'm making 10 early on, like in the early years.
Yeah, because they see that as valuable, right? I suppose it depends on, yeah, look, there's so much in terms of a value proposition to an offer. And I think for founders listening to this, something important to gauge and sort of take from this as well is the idea that, you know, leadership is also leading from the front and pushing from the back. You know, I guess to some degree, and I think you touched on it earlier, Jack, like it's important for a founder to understand the principles. Because if you don't understand the principles before you're in a position where you can hire, outsource, and, you know, and hire someone like you, whatever it is, like you need to be the guiding light to some degree to have at least an opinion. I would strongly urge founders, if you have an offer, a coaching, a service where it's a high ticket exchange, something that requires a considered purchase meaning they're not going to just fucking put their credit card down because, you know, there's a landing page. It requires a conversation. You may need to deal with some curly questions or whatever it is. There's some competition in the market and they need to decide whether or not it makes sense to purchase from you. So if you're a founder, you operate a business like this, well, my strong recommendation would be that you study at least the principles of sales so that you have an opinion. Now, when I say an opinion, it's like opinions are like assholes. Everyone has them. So I'm not talking about an opinion based on instinct. I'm talking about an actual considered opinion where you've made some research, you've done some skill, you've got some skill because you've either had some mentoring yourself, you've read some very relevant books that are relevant today as well, not just 20 years ago. That you've been on calls yourself, that you've had a degree of experience in reviewing those and getting some feedback so you understand the mechanics of good and great and bad, for example. And that gives you an opinion worth listening to. So that when you have an agent come on, at least you can guide them through. Because at the start of any offer, like anyone that's built an offer, which, Jack, you have an offer, for example, right? You've got your own offer, and at some point you have to sell that. So like that was a process of building that skill, acquiring those skills to be able to have the context that if someone came into your business, that you could easily transfer the information so they could work autonomously without the extreme control over the top of them, you know? So yeah, I would strongly urge, like from a leadership perspective, like be the person you want them to be. Like if you want them to be highly trained, highly skilled, highly ethical, you need to be that person.
Yep. That's right.
Because we lead from the front, we push from the back in many ways, right? And it's a daily thing. Like my team are always looking at me. I suppose not, and I train my guys very, very consistently in the way that, hey, you know, I'm not your only source of truth. The principle is the source of truth. A principle, a philosophy, then a framework, and then tactical stuff. Because if you understand that, then you can quickly identify anyone that's teaching that operates within this principle, and then it has these frameworks that can add to your arsenal, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, and and so then let's just, I suppose, to wrap this up and to maybe focus in on something else that we can discuss briefly, which is, where do you see being the greatest opportunities in offers? You have the privilege of having intimate, like, insight into multiple offers and niches and so forth, and maybe, you know, you're seeing a shift, maybe not,
Yep.
you know, in terms of what's hot, what's not.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of riding a wave. You know, at the turn of COVID, health was extremely hot. It is not anymore, not extremely hot. Times are changing, markets are shifting, human behavior is in flux. In other words, how we work, how we live. So what are you seeing? What are offers that are absolutely red hot?
I think just as a caveat, like the first thing, that if a salesperson can start in fitness, they will truly become exceptional. It just sets them up for success, even 6 months, right? It's only
It's
something
crazy, isn't it? I couldn't agree more.
because these guys that all came up and selling an ROI based offer on their first offer, it's very easy to convince someone to give you $1 and you'll give them $2 back. But convincing someone to, like, as Matt says, wake up early, not eat what they want, get uncomfortable, and it take ages to see results is a lot harder of itself, Nate. So if they can do that, if you can do that, you'll be truly great. And then from there, you're going to find it very easy. I know if I'm interviewing and I see people solve fitness at a decent level, I'm like, he's going to easily do this if it's an ROI based offer. So I look at that as well. A huge thing, just as a caveat to the whole thing. But right now, what I see crushing is, like, where a lot of people say crypto offers are huge in the US. If you're in Australia, real estate is a religion of Australia. And I have multiple clients in real estate, and it seems like any real estate offers, right, the sales reps make pretty solid money. Like if you can find something in real estate, whether it's real estate education, whether it's an actual service like buyer's agency service, that is going to be a very lucrative industry. And then over on, like, US and Australia, the closer you can get to something being a job, less a, like, business model, like a job opportunity offer, like getting into, say, coding, right? Especially with, there's a belief, there's a sentiment bubble, whatever you want to call it, that AI tech is a growing job industry. You want to find, basically, your compass is, whether it's like real estate or whatever it is, it's just, if we see the two principles that connect that real estate offer in Australia and, say, a job opportunity worldwide, is that it doesn't take much convincing for the potential buyer to see the value in it, because there's a general belief in the zeitgeist, in, like, public opinion, that XYZ is happening. AI is
Very wide idea.
Yeah, it's a pretty wide idea. There's a latent denier already being
Very wide ideas. Yeah.
Exactly. So any of these offers you can identify. People believe crypto is going to the moon. People believe real estate's so sure, safe as houses. Like, tech is this. Like, any of these offers that people see the value in already are obviously going to be more lucrative. That said, you know, if you can really catch something before the wave, like I was fortunate enough to, before affiliate marketing ever really blew up, I was in a position where I was selling and managing an account there. And people just, as we sort of caught it pre-AI, just for context, there was no ChatGPT, and part of what we sold was an AI generator, a script generator that had a large language model in it. This thing, like, you'd mention it on the call, and people would just think, like, it's game over. Like, they'll just lay down straight away. So if you can catch these things, like, if you can actually get a sensitivity about what's going on in the market, what is an unserved solution, and ultimately what kind of people already believe already, bubbles are where, in reality, where a lot of the money is at as a salesperson. You know?
Yeah, I love that. I suppose then,
real estate,
yeah,
crypto.
you know, I see it, you know, and then sometimes you've got sort of blue oceans within red oceans, identifying potentially something that may be a little exhausted, but for some reason there's something unique about a particular offer that's so unique. For example, there's one distinguishing factor that just makes it a blue ocean opportunity. And so for that reason, for a period of time before there's additional competition, that may be a wave that you may want to ride, right? So for those founders, but so to wrap this up, and to give us, I suppose, an insight into the way, you operate your heartbeat, how would you describe what it is that you fight for and what is it that you defend against?
I want people, I think a big part of the reason why I'm so attracted to sales operations and sales management, as opposed to just being a sales rep myself anymore, which I've done and I still do to this day, obviously for my own business. Why I do it is I just love to see people smash through resistance and do what they want, and ultimately but do it through earning it, not through what's expedient and just trying to find a shortcut, but actually getting the freedom to be able to do what they want by using their mind to solve a problem. So this is why I help founders understand sales data, right? Otherwise, sales data can be very dry on the surface. But I like the idea that you can put your will into something and drill down into the cause and effect reasons, right? And then solve that problem and make it happen, right? It's very gratifying to help me to see not just that I can do it for my own business, but see that I can teach it to a founder and then they can go make something happen. And, I've got clients that are making multiple 7 figures a month in real estate, and yet I help them solve problems with data for the first time. And then they go, I know it's an equation just like real estate, but I can't believe it actually worked. That's very satisfying for me, right? So seeing people gain this skill to be able to overcome and turn something from confusion into what is very tangible is what I'm all about. Whether it's for myself, with my partner, with business, with clients, that's what I love. Is just helping people realize there's cause and effect, and pretty much every problem in this space is solvable, and it starts with accurate diagnosis.
So what is it you fight against?
I think just again, mediocrity, people just inaccurately doing things, anything expedient, like trying to take a shortcut to something, not to sure, efficiency is important. If a shortcut gets you there better, great, but any form of laziness, any form of selfishness, any form of lying or non-transparency, I just think, not just because I feel betrayed, but ultimately because it's not going to help you in the long term. I'd rather go to bed at night knowing, for example, I could have scaled my offer 3 times as much if I made claims beyond my skill level, right? But I didn't do that. I focused on getting good properly and only saying what I've done, right? And because of that, it's now very simple for me. I don't struggle to acquire new clients. It's a pretty straightforward conversation. You know what I mean? So I just think it's not about whether or not you make me feel bad because you're lying to me. I just think, man, it's going to hurt you in the long run. It always does. So build from a strong foundation. And I just hate anyone but I hate you into any sort of focus on doing it quickly, rushing, anything like that, and not being accurate on something, and then complacency. I don't care how good you are. Any form of hubris, like you said, that example with the golf instructor, I have more skill than a lot of people, less than some, but when I go to a golf instructor, I would absolutely act like I know nothing. Whereas some people that have less expertise in some other field would go there with some arrogance or hubris and say, I was good at this other thing once, I've done this. I just think hubris, arrogance, lack of transparency, laziness, lack of discipline are all the things that I fight against, because they really end up getting you stuck. It's almost like a one-way door. It's very hard. It takes a long time to come back from that, years to rebuild, if you chase what is expedient, not what's meaningful.
Yeah, there's a famous quote that takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but a moment to destroy it, by Warren Buffett or
Exactly.
or Charlie Munger. I think you mentioned that. But well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Freedom Formula podcast. Huge thank you to Jack, the one and only Schiavone. Did I pronounce that right?
Perfectly.
Big thank you for obviously breaking down what is, I guess, true sales precision, and helping us understand what that actually looks like, and reminding us that discipline isn't actually the opposite of freedom. It's actually the foundation. When we sort of think about some of the takeaways, freedom without the structure, the deep understanding of the data, doesn't exist. It's just chaos. even with the best of intentions. If you want to obviously build sales teams and you want to improve what you're doing, well, of course, find out more about Jack and what he's doing in the show notes. You can find out a bit more about his work and what he does. And if you're ready to learn more about your own journey and your own freedom, and you want to break free from the status quo in the 9 to 5, go and complete the freedom assessment and find out how exactly it is that you can get into entrepreneurship and learn the skill of remote sales, or even for that matter, learn what it takes to start to create impact and do more in this life than just showing up, bunding on, bunding off. I'm Shane DeCosta, your host. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Freedom Formula podcast, please do so now so you don't miss any future episodes with other freedom fighters just like Jack. Remember, freedom isn't free, but it's always worth fighting for. Once again, thank you, and I'll see you on the next episode.